I knew something was off the second I saw the printer jam. Doesn't sound like a crisis, I know, but at Harwell, I ran logistics like a heart-lung machine. When the printer jams, it means someone's trying to pull a contract they weren't supposed to see. I walked over, cleared the tray, and there it was. Dirk Lanner's name on a requisition pull, flagged Fleet Realignment Escrow Term Triggers. Bold move considering I never gave him dashboard access. 12 years. Same job, same desk, same battered Lenovo that I never once let it replace because it housed every clause, timestamp, and policy mod we'd ever pushed through. Fleet logistics wasn't glamorous, but I kept over 380 vehicles humming across 6 states with nothing but a calendar, a risk matrix, and the kind of obsessive record keeping that makes most people uncomfortable. I didn't care about recognition. I cared about uptime. I cared about compliance audits coming back clean. I cared that the drivers didn't get stuck roadside in Arizona because some VP decided preventive maintenance was cost drift. Then Dirk happened. Dirk Lanner arrived in a 3-piece suit and a TED Talk smile. Corporate transplant from some agile transformation circus in Seattle. He held a town hall where he used the word synergize no fewer than 12 times and ended it with a slide that said, Legacy Waste Legacy People. Charming. I didn't say a word, just watched him grip the edge of the podium like he was bracing for applause that never came. He made rounds the next week. Help me understand your role, he said, standing by my desk with a smug tilt in his voice. I explained, briefly, the framework I used for fleet scheduling, our lease rollover logic, and the buffer escrow reserves built into each high-mileage unit. His eyes glazed over halfway through. He said, Sounds like a lot of paperwork for things AI can probably manage. I smiled. Let me know when AI learns to renegotiate a rollover clause at 2 a.m. From a motel in Bakersfield. He didn't laugh. He started asking questions about my pay grade. Had finance send him a breakdown of salaries over performance metrics? I know because Anna from payroll forwarded me the email by accident. He'd marked me as high cost, low visibility, potential sunset. That was the phrase. Potential sunset. Like I was a weather pattern, not the one person standing between his ego and a 14 fleet service disruption. And if you're watching this far in, can I ask you a quick favor? Hit that like button and subscribe. I know 97% of folks just listen without it, but it really helps us keep making these stories. Thanks. Now back to Dirk's little demolition plan. He didn't understand that what looked like obscure legacy line items were actually the pressure valves of our operation. Tier 2 contingency wasn't fluff. It was the pre-cleared vendor escalation channel I'd negotiated after the Iowa derailment. Buffer reserve escrow wasn't a rounding error. It was the only reason we survived last year's diesel hike without client penalties. But Dirk thought in dashboards and filters, not in brake pads and compliance filings. He said we were bloated. That was his word. Bloated, as if redundancy in logistics were some kind of crime. As if preparing for worst-case scenarios made you weak, not professional. I tightened everything that week. Polished every contract index, archived every vendor renewal, made sure Clause 11C, the independent termination escrow protocol, was up to date and fully notarized, just in case. Then on Thursday, I noticed my calendar looked emptier than usual. Friday's project sync, canceled. My monthly audit call, removed. No invites, no memos, just a single email sitting in my inbox, time-stamped 4:07 p.m. Subject, final review, fleet realignment. No greeting, no body text, just a meeting room code and Dirk's name at the bottom. It didn't take a psychic to know what was coming. I didn't panic. I printed out my exit checklist. Updated the clause tracker one last time. Brought a thermos of black tea in case HR tried to stall me with those pathetic retention slides. Friday, 4:36 p.m., Dirk was already standing in the glass conference pod with one of the HR drones. She looked nervous. He didn't. He opened with, After reviewing our department structure, we've concluded your position is being made redundant, effective immediately. He smiled like he thought I might cry. I stood, handed him my badge, and said exactly one thing. Good luck on Monday. He blinked. Excuse me? You'll see. Then I left. Didn't slam the door, didn't look back, just walked out of Harwell Transport Group like someone who already knew exactly what they'd left behind and who was about to find out what it meant to cut the one person who understood where every axle, clause, and contingency in that company actually lived. Dirk thought he was subtle. He wasn't. He thought sending his review email without a calendar invite made it feel less formal, less threatening. But when someone puts final in the subject line and schedules it for 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, it doesn't take a genius to read the writing on the glass walls of that conference pod. The week before that email, his new analyst, some MBA intern named Connor, who still wore his college lanyard like it was a badge of competence, started poking around our internal billing structures. I caught his audit trail in the shared cost database, digging through tags like Tier 2 contingency and fleet float offsets. His comments said it all: obscure, bloated, legacy waste. They didn't even ask what any of it meant, just assumed it was nonsense because it didn't fit in a pivot table. Connor flagged my name to Dirk with a red highlight: high salary, low digital footprint. That's how they framed it. Because I didn't have some neon-colored dashboard or Slack channel with a goofy name like #FleetWizards, they figured I wasn't doing anything worth keeping. My work didn't flash. It functioned. That's what kept Harwell standing through floods, fuel protests, and 3 federal inspections that came within a hair of freezing our entire Midwest operation. But sure, let's delete the woman with the low digital footprint. Dirk called a team meeting midweek. "We've been assessing optimization opportunities," he said, beaming like he'd just solved world peace. "There's an opportunity to automate several roles that rely too heavily on manual approvals and outdated processes." I knew exactly what that meant. My name was already on the chopping block. I just hadn't gotten the courtesy call yet. See, what Dirk never understood, what he didn't bother to ask, is that every single manual approval I issued was a legal filter. I had mapped our risk exposure across 3 dimensions: time, asset class, and client tier. The buffer reserve escrow wasn't some arbitrary stash of funds. It was a contingency firewall I negotiated after the state of Missouri retroactively revoked our emissions clearance due to a typo on their end. We had 19 rigs rerouted in 48 hours, and not a single one hit a fee. Why? Because I'd built those buffers, anticipated failures, and embedded vendor swap clauses that let us flip contracts without blinking. Same with Tier 2 contingency. That wasn't fluff. It was the reason the Vaughn Pharma contract didn't implode when their backup facility in Texas lost power during that freak heat wave. The trucks rerouted, the temperature-sensitive meds stayed cold, and we got a personal thank you note from their COO. Dirk never saw it. I never sent it to him. Didn't need to. I'd always believed that if you do your job right, nobody notices, until they take it for granted. By Thursday, the internal chatter was shifting. I heard snippets from procurement. Who handles the vendor SLA escalations now? One of the newer route planners asked why the dashboard showed a red lock icon on the compliance tracker. Someone in IT sent out a reminder asking if anyone knew who the named contract manager was for fleet escrow releases. No one replied, because it had always been me. But Dirk was convinced the system was the solution, that people like me, who held old-school authority, who cross-referenced 6 systems by muscle memory, were dinosaurs. Never mind that I built the very framework they now called the system. So when I saw his email, subject, final review, fleet realignment, I didn't panic. I didn't even blink. I just opened my document archive, confirmed the trigger flags were in place, and sent myself one final backup to a drive he'd never find. The exit script was already written, not by legal, not by HR, by me. Clause 11C was buried deep in our third-party fleet agreements, the independent termination escrow protocol. If a contract manager departed without a formal transition plan, the clause activated. Payments were rerouted, vendor access paused, service authorizations expired, compliance locks engaged. And Dirk, he had no idea any of that existed, because he never asked, never read, never imagined the quietest person in the building might be the one who built every single rail his supply train was riding on. I didn't fear what was coming. I recognized it. That kind of arrogant blindness always comes with its own punishment. All I had to do was step aside and let it unfold. Friday, 4:36 p.m. sharp. I was already walking toward the pod before the clock struck. Not because I respected the invitation. Dirk hadn't even sent it with a greeting, but because I like knowing exactly when the avalanche starts. The conference pod was all glass, all theater. HR sat to the side like a stage prop, her hands folded over a folder she hadn't even opened yet. Dirk was standing like he practiced in the mirror that morning, feet planted, arms wide like a magician about to reveal a dove. He didn't waste time. After reviewing departmental redundancies, we've decided your position is no longer necessary. Effective immediately. He said it with that smirking cadence people use when they've rehearsed something they think will shake you, like it was supposed to hurt, like I was supposed to plead or weep or show even a flicker of surprise. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out my badge, set it neatly on the table between us, and looked him in the eye. "Good luck on Monday," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You'll see." That was it. I turned, walked out, and left behind the chill of recycled air, those pale HR eyes, and Dirk's puffed up certainty that he'd just done something revolutionary. I didn't need a box. Everything I needed was already with me, or already gone. The backup files, the notarized contract records, the terminal keys, the service triggers embedded in legalese they never bothered to audit. I passed Anna from payroll on the way out. She gave me a look that said more than words could. I gave her a nod. She knew. She always did. Downstairs, the vending machine light flickered. Familiar, comforting. I bought a root beer for no good reason and sat on the bench outside, watching the trucks roll into the loading bay. They didn't know yet, but they would. They'd feel it in stages. Saturday, maybe, someone from the scheduling team would notice the telematics dashboard wasn't syncing with the maintenance logs. Sunday, a client would ping someone in procurement about why their fleet route hadn't been confirmed. And Monday would be the reckoning. Because without transition protocols, without the chain of custody I alone maintained, the fleet's legal compliance would default to escrow. That meant hold patterns. That meant vendors freezing service. That meant contracts in limbo. Dirk thought he was deleting an Excel sheet. He was pulling the pin on a live grenade. The system wasn't automated, it was alive, and I was the heartbeat. As I watched the dusk roll in, I thought about all the times I'd stayed late for reroutes, caught missing maintenance windows before they became lawsuits, negotiated last-minute lease extensions so Dirk could have a clean KPI line to show the board. Not once did I ask for recognition. Not once did I expect loyalty. But I did expect, maybe foolishly, some respect for the web of things I held together. Quietly, without headlines, without fail. I took a final sip of root beer, stood up, brushed off the bench, and as I walked to my car, I didn't look back at the glass walls or the glowing logo or Dirk's silhouette, pacing like a man who just remembered too late he forgot to ask the most important question. Who controlled the actual system? He never asked, so I never told, but he was about to find out. Saturday morning, Dirk was already firing off emails like a man trying to outrun smoke. I wasn't copied on any of them, of course, but Anna sent me screenshots. Said she accidentally had access to the wrong distro group. Happens. He told procurement to reassign my tasks. Shift contract oversight to Connor, he wrote, like that boy had ever read a lease clause that wasn't color-coded and narrated by a YouTube explainer. Legal confirmed it, said Dirk had authority to restructure. HR filed the change notice. IT opened a task to update system access and transfer credentialing. All very official, all very doomed. The fleet contracts dashboard, the one they thought lived on a cloud instance named after Dirk's favorite acronym, was actually rooted in a permissions matrix I'd built from scratch, not a SaaS license. A local shell layered through redundant proxies, governed by escrow-based triggers. When I tried to access it, they got the welcome screen, then a blank redirect. No error message, no login fail, just a gray page and a blinking cursor. I'd built it that way for a reason. If the system didn't recognize the credentials as originating from a valid contract manager ID, it did nothing. No alerts, no flags, just silence. By Sunday morning, that silence was starting to buzz. One of the junior fleet schedulers, Chelsea, I think, posted in the internal Slack, "Hey, is it normal for RouteMatch to show pending sync authorization for more than 8 hours?" No response. Then Mexico City chimed in. Their regional manager emailed ops with a question that went viral within the company by Sunday evening. Why are our trucks flagged as non-compliant? That set off the first wave of calls. Compliance thought it was a licensing error. IT thought it was a time zone mismatch. Dirk, bless his linear little brain, thought someone just forgot to hit refresh. He told everyone to stay calm. He had contingencies in place. Said they'd circle back Monday with a revised access protocol. Meanwhile, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my third cup of coffee, watching the system logs update in real time. I wasn't hacking anything. I didn't have to. The contracts had built-in triggers. Smart contracts, sure, but not blockchain nonsense. Just pure logic built into the core of our service agreements. Clause 11C. If the named contract manager leaves without formal transition, all vendor authorizations are suspended until a new authorized signature is established and notarized across all active counterparties. The last time someone tried to override that clause was in 2018. The override attempt crashed 4 regional hubs and cost us $1.7 million in fuel credits. After that, the board told me, make sure this never happens again. So I did. Now it was happening again, except this time, no one had me on speed dial. I imagine Sunday night at Harwell felt like waiting for a storm you don't believe is coming. The lights are still on, the reports haven't failed yet, but something's off. The hum of stability is gone. Dirk probably still thought Monday would be cleanup. He'd planned to unveil a new dashboard tool at the department sink, maybe show off some PowerPoint slides about operational velocity and cost transparency. But instead, by the time the sun rose Monday, 5 cities were reporting service stations locked out of their own maintenance portals. Clients weren't receiving route confirmations. Regional managers were staring at dashboards with blank columns where fleet health reports should have been. And still, nobody could figure out why. The pieces hadn't clicked into place yet, but they were about to. And Dirk, who had spent all weekend repositioning himself as the guy with answers, was seconds from becoming the guy no one could look at without panic twitching behind their eyes. Because underneath all the tidy org charts and protocol drafts, the truth was spreading like a slow fog. The trucks were still parked, and the woman who made them move was gone. By 7:12 a.m. Monday morning, the dashboard Dirk loved to show off during meetings was lit up like a Christmas tree wired by someone with a grudge. Red, yellow, gray, then more red. 14 client fleets had ground to a full, legally enforced halt. Trucks that should have been halfway to Albuquerque sat inert in Houston, Milwaukee, Denver, Charleston, and Flagstaff, idle. Engines cold, not a mile logged since midnight. The telematics systems weren't syncing with the maintenance logs. Preventive service reminders, disabled. Geofencing triggers, offline. Route optimization, locked out due to unverified compliance. It didn't take long for the phones to start ringing. Harwell's main line got jammed by 8:30 a.m. Service stations from 5 cities all reported the same message when trying to authorize scheduled work. Authorization token expired. Contact listed contract manager to renew. Except there wasn't one anymore. Because I wasn't there, and no one, not legal, not ops, not even Dirk, had designated a successor. That's when panic set in. Someone from client services ran across the floor with a tablet in her hands like it was a lit fuse. "They're going to default," she said to no one and everyone. Vaughn Pharma just emailed. "Failure to provide compliant transport documentation within 48 hours will result in breach proceedings." Dirk summoned IT, legal, ops, and one poor soul from scheduling into the war room. I imagined it like a bad reality show panel, confused, overconfident, and completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. That's when the real gift landed. A junior analyst, Madison, fresh out of college, still writing notes in pink ink, was the one who found it. She'd been searching for past escalation templates in the archival system when she stumbled across a document titled Contractor Transition Readiness, Indexed Clauses, 2008 to 2022. She scrolled past pages of nested agreements, misfiled PDFs, and vendor lists until she found it. Clause 11C, Independent Termination Escrow Protocol. She read it, reread it, highlighted it. Then she raised her hand in the meeting, because she still thought corporate meetings worked like classrooms, and said, "I think this is what's happening." Dirk brushed her off at first. "That's legacy policy," he muttered. "We've migrated those." "No, sir," Madison said. "It's still active. The clause hasn't been sunset. The system backend references it in the service chain." Silence. Legal blinked. Ops stared at the screen. Madison, bless her brave heart, read the clause aloud. In the event that the named contract manager of record departs without a formal transition document acknowledged by the receiving entity, all system access, payment flows, and vendor authorizations shall automatically route to escrow status. The system shall default to compliance lockout mode until restored by a new notarized contract manager designation. She looked up. "It activated," she said, "automatically, at midnight." They asked where it was coded. "Who built the trigger?" She said, "Her name's in the commit history." Dirk froze. He hadn't just fired someone who managed files. He'd fired the woman who designed the protocol. the woman whose initials were baked into the control logic of every fleet compliance contract the company ran, not in the front-facing code, not in the dashboards, but in the guts of the thing, in the clauses, the fail-safes, the redirects. They pulled up the access logs. Every trigger pointed back to a digital signature. My name, date stamped, legal approved, notarized by 2 witnesses from a time Dirk probably hadn't even known the company existed. He started asking the wrong questions in a panic. Can we override it? Who else has access? Why didn't IT flag this earlier? Legal finally said it. Because she didn't need system access to flip the switch. The contracts did it for her. By that point, Dirk's ego was already bleeding out under the table, but he kept going. Called procurement, asked if they could fast-track a re-signing with vendors. Procurement said no, those vendors were locked too, because without a valid contract manager ID, they couldn't legally process signatures, disburse funds, or authorize services. The vendors were protected. The contracts saw to that, because I saw to that. Harwell Transport wasn't dealing with a technical error. They were dealing with an autoimmune response. The system was defending itself from him. And in the center of it all, buried in the clause Madison had just read aloud, was the proof of what Dirk had refused to see. I hadn't been a legacy hire. I was the firewall. And now, they were locked out. Tuesday morning started like a slow bleed. No alarms, no loud bangs, just small fractures spreading in every direction. By 9:05 a.m., client services had logged 38 inbound calls. By 9:21, it was over 100. The scripts they'd been trained to read, "Let me connect you to our compliance officer," or "We're currently updating our systems," fell apart the moment clients started asking the real questions. We can't service our vehicles. Why was my insurance policy canceled? Where's the fleet compliance officer? It wasn't just calls. Emails began to pile up like storm warnings. Subject lines looked like distress signals. Escalated. Service failure, immediate response required, notice of non-performance penalty. Dirk told the comms team to issue a generic status update. We are currently experiencing an internal realignment process and appreciate your patience. That lasted less than 30 minutes before clients began replying directly with legal threats. The first bomb dropped at 10:12 a.m. Eastern. Vaughn Pharma's VP of Logistics forwarded their contract clause to Harwell Legal, highlighting the service continuity obligation and attaching a screenshot showing inactive fleet compliance. The final line was simple. If services are not restored by 10 a.m. CST tomorrow, we will consider this a breach under Clause 5.7b. Dirk started to sweat. Not visibly, not yet, but his voice had changed. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't chuckling through conference calls. His sentences shortened. He stopped using buzzwords. Even Connor noticed. Said Dirk was doing that jaw clench thing. By noon, Dirk had legal in a room with a full whiteboard of names, contracts, and time-stamped triggers. They still didn't understand the scope, so they did what they should have done weeks earlier. They opened my archive. I can only imagine the silence in that room when they saw it for the first time. There was no password, no encryption, just a filing system so precise it bordered on obsession. A color-coded index by client. Subfolders labeled by clause type. Escrow response triggers, maintenance contingencies, vendor reassignment preclearances, insurance rollover windows. Everything logged. Everything notarized. Hand-signed contracts. Contractual amendments. Every change I'd ever made. Scanned, cross-referenced, and date-stamped. There was even a folder labeled "If I'm Gone." Inside it, a flowchart. Step 1. Trigger Clause 11C via Exit Protocol. Step 2. Escrow routing locks vendor access. Step 3. Contact listed successor to restore status, currently blank. Step 4. If no successor is named, system remains in compliance lockdown. And then, underlined in red ink, this is not a bug, it is the design. Dirk turned pale, according to Anna. He asked how long the system had been like this. Legal said, since 2010. He asked why no one had flagged it. They replied, because she documented everything and no one read it. Connor, the analyst who helped kick off the restructuring, tried to save face. Suggested they bypass the clause by having IT spoof a contract manager credential and push it through the system. IT politely reminded him that doing so would violate 6 federal transport regulations and trigger immediate vendor disqualifications. Dirk snapped. Then just call her. No one moved. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the walls were closing in. Not publicly. He was still giving pep talks and posting emoji-filled Slack updates about adaptability under pressure. But behind those glass office doors, the panic was setting in. The archive didn't just expose their mistake, it proved how preventable it was. Everything had been there waiting. They just never bothered to open the folder. They thought institutional knowledge meant notes in a shared drive. They didn't realize it could mean a living system, one that was loyal to logic, not leadership. And the more they searched, the more obvious it became. This wasn't sabotage, it was exactly what I said it was when I walked out. A warning, a consequence, a locked door with no key because they threw it out before asking who built the damn lock. Dirk thought he'd cleaned house. But now the house had no lights, no plumbing, and no one left who remembered where the circuit box even was. And somewhere, in a quiet file labeled Compliance Continuity Recommendations, he finally found the closing line I wrote 3 years ago. If this system goes dark, it's because someone assumed the lights would just stay on. Wednesday morning, the top floor conference room smelled like someone had microwaved dread. The board had convened early, unusual, since most of them treated anything before 10 a.m. as beneath their pay grade. But this was different. By then, Harwell was bleeding from the inside, and everyone knew where the knife had come from. Dirk stood at the head of the table, flipping through a printed timeline like it would somehow make this look like an unforeseen incident. HR sat 2 seats down, visibly shrinking. It had stopped pretending they had it under control. The CIO looked like he hadn't slept. Probably hadn't. Dirk's voice had taken on that edge, half bravado, half desperation. We were told she wasn't mission critical. Her tasks were low automation, high cost. HR signed off. IT confirmed her systems could be reassigned. She literally built the systems, someone from Ops muttered under their breath. Dirk ignored him. Legacy processes are always a risk. We just didn't know how deep she'd embedded herself. One of the board members, a logistics guy from their trucking subsidiary, tilted his head. You mean how deeply she embedded functionality into operations? Dirk pivoted. It failed to flag the escalation triggers. IT shot back. Because they weren't in the systems, they were in the contracts. Another board member. Why didn't legal know? Legal's GC looked down at his tablet. Because no one ever asked her to explain Clause 11C. It wasn't hidden. She emailed it out during last year's vendor compliance audit. Subject line, Re-termination escrow, final protocol. The room went quiet. Then someone from Risk, Janine I think, folded her hands, looked straight at Dirk and said, "Just call her." Dirk flinched. She made it very clear this was deliberate. Did she? Janine asked. She said, "You'll see," Dirk insisted. That's not subtle. Someone pulled up my exit transcript. It had 2 lines. Your position is being made redundant, effective immediately, response. Good luck on Monday. That was it. Legal confirmed, no threats, no admissions, no breaches, nothing but those 5 words and a badge drop. She didn't sabotage anything, Janine said. She let the system behave exactly as she designed it. And it was right about then that someone, the name was never confirmed, quietly did what Dirk wouldn't. They messaged me. The notification blinked onto my screen mid-morning while I was sipping tea and deleting old work files from a hard drive they didn't even know existed. Is the lockout permanent? It read. No greeting, no signature, just 6 words and a question mark. Typed like someone who wasn't supposed to be asking, but didn't have a choice anymore. I stared at it for a long minute. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, that part was over, but because they were still pretending this was a favor I could grant. When really, the system wasn't waiting for me. It was waiting for accountability, a name, a successor, a legally notarized replacement they still hadn't filed, because they were too busy pointing fingers and trying to salvage face. They weren't in control anymore. The system was. And the system didn't bargain. By midday, Dirk was floundering. Vaughn Pharma's breach window had less than 24 hours left. The Arizona DOT had issued a formal compliance inquiry. Internal deadlines were slipping, regional hubs were bottlenecking, and procurement was 1 voicemail away from revolt. Still, Dirk wouldn't bend. I will not give her that power, he hissed to the board. But that's the thing he never understood. I didn't take power. I just never let go of it. Now, the weight of it was pressing into every corner of his precious org chart. No threats, no sabotage, just pure design. Silent, final, unforgiving. They were past pride now, way past it. This was the beginning of the bargain phase, when denial breaks and desperation sets in. But I'd already walked out. I didn't need to return. The system was still speaking for me. Thursday began with a whimper from the Arizona hub. 22 trucks idle, 6 over their service interval, and none legally clear to move. The fleet was down 27%, and that was the best case estimate, according to the morning dispatch log. No backups, no certified vendors. Maintenance tickets were stacking like a Vegas deck. One regional compliance officer simply wrote, "We're dead in the water," in his escalation note. No one even corrected him. By 9 o'clock a.m., the Department of Transportation's Southwest Division had issued a formal non-compliance inquiry. It wasn't framed as a threat. It was worse. Just a calm, bureaucratic question about why contracted vehicles weren't meeting their emission and safety documentation milestones. Failure to reply within 48 hours would trigger a suspension of Harwell's eligibility for 3 active state contracts. One of those contracts, worth $41.6 million over 6 quarters. At 9:24 a.m., Dirk was still clinging to the illusion of control. He was drafting a new round of emails, task force plans, interim oversight delegation, restoration workflows. His face had gone blank, the kind of blank that doesn't blink. A man piloting a ship that's already split below deck but still ordering turns like the wheels connected. Then his screen blinked. No notification ping, no sender listed, just a silent appearance in his inbox, a single email, subject line blank. Attached was one document. File name, final contingency executed.pdf. He opened it. Of course he did. Inside, just 4 lines of text centered on the page. Fleet operational status, compliance lock, maintenance authority, escrow lock, triggered, system override, not applicable clause reference, 11C. Authorization matrix finalized at the very bottom, smaller font, left aligned. This protocol was executed per terms agreed and notarized 10/17/2009. Then beneath it, system status irreversible. Dirk stared at it, not for seconds, for minutes. There were people in the room with him, Connor, Anna, someone from legal, but no one spoke. No one even pretended to know what to do anymore, because that word, irreversible, wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a threat. It was the closing of a door, a final, quiet, notarized truth. The system had reached the end of its contingency ladder, and there was no one left on the other side with the authority to reset it. Every client who hadn't already escalated was now waiting for one thing: answers. But Dirk had none, because the woman he'd fired for being low digital footprint had left behind not silence, but structure. Not chaos, but cold, precise logic. And now the structure was doing what it was designed to do. When mishandled, when misunderstood, when abandoned by the only person who knew where the override key even lived. The board convened again at 11:42 a.m. No one even argued about whose fault it was anymore. The numbers were beyond spin. Default penalties were inbound. PR firms had been contacted. One director simply whispered, "Clause 11C," and rubbed his temples like it had personally insulted his children. Dirk sat there in the dead quiet. No voice, no defense, only the sound of systems following orders written years ago, with calm, inked signatures and contingency logic that didn't care who had the title on their email footer. There are moments in corporate collapse that don't involve shouting or slamming fists. Just a single line in a file from someone you thought didn't matter. System status, irreversible. And in that silence, even Dirk had to understand. He hadn't just fired the woman who managed logistics. He had fired the architect of consequence. Friday morning was soft. Cold air, slow sun, the hum of delivery vans that weren't mine anymore. I sat by the window with my usual black tea, no sugar, no cream, and watched traffic drift like nothing had ever gone wrong. But I knew. Somewhere across the river, in Harwell's head office, Dirk was probably sitting in the ruins of what he still called transition friction. He still didn't know it wasn't friction, it was consequence. At 8:03 a.m., my old phone buzzed once. Not a call, not a message, just a final system notification. Access terminated, account deactivated. That was it. The last thread cut. The last shadow of my login finally winked out of existence. It didn't hurt. It felt like exhaling. By then, every clause I'd authored, every compliance trigger I'd embedded, every chain of custody I'd notarized had already done its work. I hadn't interfered. I hadn't lifted a finger since walking out. I didn't need to. The system had held. not out of revenge, but because that's what it was meant to do, built not for power, but for protection, for order, for the rare moment someone like Dirk would treat a framework like scaffolding instead of structure. They thought I was overpaid for paperwork. They never understood the paperwork was the system. At 8:19 a.m., I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer it at first, let it ring out while I stirred my tea, but curiosity won. The voice was calm, a bit rehearsed. A woman this time. "Hi, I'm calling from Ryland and Hart Consulting. We heard you might be the original architect of the contingency matrix for Harwell Transport." I didn't answer immediately. I looked out at the road. 2 garbage trucks, a city bus, and a school van lined up in perfect rhythm. The world kept moving. "I'm sorry," she said after a beat. "Are we mistaken?" I finally spoke, quiet and clear. "No, you're not." She paused. "Would you be open to discussing a senior resilience systems role? We've been following Harwell's situation. You don't need to name names. We already understand." I didn't say yes, not right away, but I didn't say no either. By 10 a.m., 2 more emails came through, one from a compliance firm in Chicago, one from a legal tech group in DC, all with the same question: did you build the system that shut down Harwell's fleet? I left them unanswered. Sometimes silence is the signature. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, and stepped outside. The world felt clean, not vindicated, just quiet, like the kind of quiet after a long, steady storm, the kind where nothing needs explaining anymore. At 11:07 a.m., I replied to just one of those emails, not with a resume, not with a pitch, just a sentence I knew would make its way back to the right boardroom. Tell him it wasn't personal. He just didn't read the fine print.